How paranoid are you, either when you were an operative or even at any point of double agents or agents trying to influence you? Like, how do you know, like, neither of us are agents?
Well, I don't know whether or not the actual engineer is an agent or not, outside of the fact that he did struggle with the cameras. So that was helpful.
But that could be deception.
Could be a deception. It could be a deception.
If you were an agent, that's what you would do, right?
Exactly right. So now you're getting to the place where you start asking, what is paranoia, right? So there's a continuum of force, which means that there's a scale where you use increased force. So like saying stop and shooting someone in the chest, those are two different elements of force on a continuum from low force to high force. The same thing is true when it comes to security awareness. There's an awareness spectrum. The low end of that spectrum is critical thinking and critical awareness. The high end of that spectrum is paranoia, right? So the goal is to understand the scale so that you can always keep yourself on the lower end of the scale. So, you didn't know how to get into the building either. I didn't know how to get into this building either, right? So that makes me feel confident that you don't have total control over this building.
But aren't those things that I would do if I were trying to fool you? Like, so, if you're an agent, you would do the same, wouldn't you?
Now what you're doing is called meta processing.
Okay.
You're trying to think, if I was this, then the other person would do this, and they would think that. It's like
it's like levels to the deception, like,
which goes against Occam's razor. Right. So I, as a professional, just to give you an example, I, as an actual professional, would never pretend to be something I'm not. Because I increase the odds that I'm going to make a mistake, the more that I have to pretend. The more that I can be genuine, the less the odds are that I'm going to make a mistake.
I thought the job is deception, though.
The job is deception, but you control when the deception happens. Right? So consider, for example, if you're navigating through the woods. I don't know if you're a Boy Scout or if you grew up in the country. Anybody who's ever used a compass to navigate knows what I'm referencing. But when you're holding a compass, the compass needle might be 3 or 5 degrees off. It doesn't look like a big margin of error in your hand. But after you walk 2 miles, 3 degrees off heading, you're way off target. You've made a massive mistake.
Yeah.
That's more of what the deception actually is. We use deception in small ways so that you can't really even tell that it's happening, because we know that in the future, when the deception is being analyzed, you'll be so off track, you won't know where the deception happened. Rather than making large deception or large deceptive moves every step of the way, that makes good Hollywood movies, but that doesn't make for good actual operations.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Yuri Benzanov?
Yeah.
Did I say that right? Benzanov? What do you think about him? Do you think it's legitimate?
I mean, it's dated. It's very old material.
84. But, I mean, I've heard certain Russians say he wasn't KGB. But I mean, what can't be denied is, like, the predictions were accurate, which is, I mean, strange, obviously.
There is, I mean, the whole idea of social, and that's what we're talking about here, is cultural subversion.
Yeah.
Right? The whole idea of cultural subversion is, it's a classic psychological principle that makes academic sense. So he could have been making those predictions in the past, and knowing that they were sociologically sound, been fine. Doesn't necessarily mean he's KGB. And not only that, you've got to remember that in the world of espionage, it's just like the world of business. People don't do just one thing, right? No operation, there is no singular operation. There's always multiple operations happening at the same time. So we create 10 operations in the hopes that 2 of them will be successful. And we already know 8 of them will fail. So when you've got Yuri as an example, Yuri was one of probably 12 defectors that defected from Russia, claiming to be KGB to come to the United States. He could have been telling the truth, or he could have just been spouting academic babble that maybe the Russians were thinking about, the Soviets were thinking about. But the point is, now, 40 years later, 50 years later, we look back on that and we're like, oh my gosh, it was prescient. It was genius. When in fact, maybe it was just 1 out of 10 operations that nobody really knew if they would work or not. It just so happens that now that we sit where we sit culturally, we're looking for an explanation.
Yeah.
It's the same concept as your conspiracy theory in reverse. Yeah. We have a fact. The fact is that we live in a polarized world. What we don't know is why we live in a polarized world. So then we find this clip from 1970 something of a KGB asset who's defected saying, oh, the Soviets did this to you. And now we have something that explains the rationale as to why we're polarized. So then we stick to it. And now we have a conspiracy theory.
If you like this short clip, make sure you click here to see the next clip or here to see the full podcast episode.